Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach. In this episode, I want to talk about a notion that Kim Scott termed as radical candor. And she writes about it in her book, aptly named Radical Candor. She also has actually a podcast called Radical Candor. But, before I kind of really deep dive into radical candor and what that fully means, let's kind of take a step back, right? Ever kind of consider that the bosses that you've ever had are kind of assholes, or that you have to, the notion that you have to be an asshole in order to be successful? Well, the reason why that's happened throughout is because, it has worked, right? That's a form, it is a way to achieve success and get shit done, essentially. But what Kim's argument is, it's not necessarily the best way, right? There's actually a more elevated way to go about that. But before we get to radical candor, because that's the term that ultimately we're trying to achieve, let's kind of break down the various things. So she has a very simple diagram where there's 4 quadrants, and there's being kind of silent on one spectrum. We'll say the west spectrum, and then there's being direct on the east spectrum, right? So that's the horizontal line. The vertical line, we'll call it the north to south line, goes at the top, the north is caring, and on the bottom, the south is being an asshole, right? And so what happens is, oftentimes, and I've kind of fallen into this category before. The term she has is ruinous empathy. So it's where, you care a lot about somebody, and this is like the top left quadrant, where you have silence and care, where you care about somebody, and therefore you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you're not direct with them. But the reason why it's called ruinous empathy is because it comes at a cost to you and to them. At the end of the day, it creates mistrust. They don't get the benefit of the notes that they might need, or whatever else, right? You're not being honest with them because you don't want to hurt their feelings. But that's not good for them, and it's not good for you. The asshole version of that is being manipulative, right? So she terms that manipulative insecurity. And that too creates mistrust, and there's no change. You're just kind of, rather than being direct, you're being an asshole about it by kind of going behind the person's back and so forth, right? Pretending to care, but not really. And it's just not good, right? So for the most part, don't do those. Just forget I even kind of said those, right? But now let's talk about the obnoxious aggressor. That's the boss hole ass, or that's the asshole boss. Sorry, that was dyslexia there. I don't know. Call it what you want. But anyway, the obnoxious aggressor, the asshole boss. And it worked, right? That's someone that is very direct, but they have no empathy. So that's the bottom right quadrant. And while it achieves results, it's good that they're very direct, because you can't misinterpret what they want. In the long run, it's not good, because it brings down team morale. And certainly, Simon Sinek has talked about the idea that we need better leaders and so forth. In his book, Leaders Eat Last and so forth. And that's where the idea of radical candor to me really comes in. It's being direct with somebody, not tippy-toeing around what needs to be said, but doing it from a place of empathy, right? Bob Iger to me is who was he's now the former CEO of the Walt Disney Company. He still kind of is because of Corona, but he did step down. He's someone that really exemplifies radical candor. He's someone who's very direct, but also empathetic. Now, Simon Sinek has a great kind of example of this. If there's a boss and you have a sales team, excuse me, and someone's not been performing, for a quarter, most bosses would be like, would go to the person. This is the obnoxious aggressor. They would go to that person and be like, "You're not performing. Get it together, or you're going to be fired." Right? That's not going to help a person ultimately perform better. That's just going to strike fear into them. Whereas someone with radical candor goes up like, "Hey, I've noticed your sales are really down this quarter. Like, what's going on? Is everything good at home and whatever else?" Because all those things that, like if the home life isn't good, for example, that is a big factor in why that they might not be performing. So taking the time to actually, understand like what is going on and showing empathy for the person will actually achieve that result. Like, that boss isn't tipping-toeing around the idea that this person's performance has been dipping, but they want to know why, right? Rather than just like this threat of like, fix it or you're out. And, at the end of the day, like it might seem like it's a little bit longer to have that discussion versus like, "You've been failing, get it together or you're out." In the long term, think about it this way. That might seem shorter, but like finding someone else that is good, that's certainly a task in and of itself that's going to take time. And ultimately, like that sort of mistrust, if you will, and that obnoxiousness will trickle down into the culture, and then people are going to want to really ultimately work. Whereas if they know that they're being cared for, man, that's a game changer. So, I would, and by the way, the nice part about radical candor is you can exercise this regardless of if you're a boss or not. Like, you can exercise radical candor with your friends. You can exercise it with your family members, your coworkers, your bosses, and things like that. Too often people have been in a position where they don't want to be critical of their bosses. But I think if you do it with actual, radical candor, you will actually earn respect. That to me is the really cool thing. Anyway, if you have any questions about this, by all means ask. If you have any thoughts of your own to add to it, please do so. I welcome it. I would highly encourage you to pick up or at least listen to Kim Scott's podcast, Radical Candor. It really is a wonderful book and can help you communicate far more effectively. And I think if we all just did a better job at communicating things, I think the world would certainly be a lot better off. Feel free to share this with somebody who you think might benefit from it. I certainly would appreciate that. And if you enjoy what I do, but you haven't yet subscribed, by all means follow, subscribe. That way you can get the benefit of all the various lessons that I put out. You can see them right when I put them out, which is daily. My social media is @PhilSvitek. Anyway, I've taken up enough of your time. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you next time.